So livestock is contributing to 1/3 of the protein supply in the world. It's 19 billion heads of animals combined and 1.3 trillion US dollar asset value. So this is quite an enormous asset we are talking about. And it provides jobs to 1.3 million people in the world, all over the chain, the livestock chain, farmers, processors, and transporters. And then we also have 1/3 of the cropland used to produce feed for livestock. So agriculture is also contributing a lot to feeding livestock. And finally, when we look at total emissions from anthropogenic sources, we have 14.5% of the global greenhouse gases produced from livestock and related activities. This is quite enormous. And now we are talking about short-lived climate pollutants, and methane is a major short-lived climate pollutant, and livestock contributes to 1/3 of anthropogenic methane. So we are talking of a very big volume of emissions when we are looking at livestock. And some authors say that livestock emissions are like the forgotten source of emissions when we are looking at emission mitigation strategies. So we also have some emissions from nitrous oxide, but it's not our concern for now. We also have some from carbon dioxide, but we are going to focus on the emissions from methane. Now, looking at the importance of the contribution of livestock to emissions, we see here is a total emission from agriculture, forestry, and other land use. We see enteric fermentation that comes from ruminants mainly is a major source. It's about 40% of total emissions from agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And then we can also see that manure is also a big source, about 25.9% of the emissions. Well, I just highlight these two elements because they are the main aspects which I'm going to focus on, because they contribute also a larger part of the emissions from livestock. Looking at the different species in the world, we can see beef cattle and dairy cattle, they are on the top. They are giving the largest amount of emissions in total, and then we get pigs, buffaloes, and all the other species producing other lower quantities of emissions. Well, these are total emissions, but now let's look at the emissions per kilogram of output. So the emissions per kilogram of meat, for example, when we look at that in the next chart, we see that beef is producing the highest amount of emission per kilogram of beef, and the reddish bars are representing emissions from ruminants, and the bluish are those from non-ruminants. So we can see clearly that ruminant production is leading to a higher quantity of emission per unit of output compared to non-ruminants. So, looking at efficiency, this chart is showing the amount of CO2 equivalents produced per kilogram of protein produced from beef. And what we see here is that the greener colors, which show lower efficiency, that show higher efficiency, sorry, it means that we use about 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide, or we produce 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide when producing 1 kilogram of protein. And here we see that there is more efficiency in the US and Canada, North America, and we also have it in Western Europe, or most of Europe. But when we look at Africa and Asia, including India, we see that we have a lower efficiency of converting our feed into proteins by using beef animals. So it also shows that we have a huge potential here to improve on the efficiency of converting the grass and the feeds that we have into valuable proteins which we can use in our diets. Then there is also a driver here. We have population, and if we look at the charts here, we see how the population has developed over the years. The developed world have now a stagnating or even a drop in population over the years. Meanwhile, the developing world, including Africa and Asia, they're having a growth in population over the years. And these are people who are going to be potential consumers. I consider every newborn child as a new consumer in the world. And well, this is not the only thing. The first thing is that there are more consumers in the world. And the second thing is that the consumer who is born today is going to consume more than what we are consuming now. That means that we will have a stronger growth in the demand for livestock products over the next years, especially as our economies are growing. We are getting more money, and we have the tendency to consume more livestock products, more proteins from animal products over the next years. So we will have a growth in demand for these products, and you can already see the projections in the chart besides that we will have almost 100% growth in demand for beef, but we have more for other livestock products. So how can we survive such a situation? We need to eat. We need to eat, so we need to produce, and what we need to do is to reduce the emissions from each unit of output we are getting. So how can we do that? I'll start by showing you a few options, but the first thing we have to bear in mind is that every strategy that leads to increase in productivity is directly leading to a reduction in livestock emissions per unit of output. So if we improve on milk productivity or in beef productivity or in poultry productivity, then we are increasing in, or we are reducing the amount of emissions per unit of the output. Then if we work on different aspects, because it's usually a combined method to reduce emissions. First, feeding. Feeding is the most important aspect that we need to target when we are looking at reduction in emissions. And one important aspect is balancing up the feed. When we balance our rations of the feed for the animals, then we have less loss of nutrients. We have a better combination of the nutrients in the feed and a more efficiency in the uptake. We have a faster passage rate in the animals, so the feed goes, especially through ruminants, it goes faster. That means that the microbes that are producing the methane, which we consider as a short-lived climate pollutants, they have less time to work because the feed passes faster, so the emissions are lower. And then also, when it goes fast, that means that if you have a better balanced feed, then you have less nitrogen excreted in the manure that goes out of the animals, and that means that the potential to get emissions from storing the manure from animals that have balanced diets is less. So we have less nutrient to waste, therefore we will have less waste from them. So there's also an approach to use local resources. We have byproducts, we have lots of crops, we have rice here, we have wheat and all different crops. Using local resources is very important because it also helps in getting the feed passed faster through the rumen, but also it helps us to save emissions from transportation. If we transport feed from far off places, we create more emissions from transportation. But we have local resources which we can use, so we just have to manage them well. We balance them into our rations, and then we make better use out of them. Next, we have forage improvement. We have pasture lands which we need to work on breeding strategies to get the best forages. And as I said, if you feed like lignified forages, then it stays longer in the rumen and there's more methane production. So we need to also practice forage management to cut the forage at the right time, not leave it to over mature. Also to have preservation techniques like silage making, just to help that the forage is of good quality and that it goes through the rumen optimally. Then we have some other options related to manure management. For example, animal husbandry. As I said before, anything that leads to improved productivity increases or reduces emissions from livestock. So if we improve the genetics, there are genetic management breeding programs going on. I was yesterday in the National Dairy Research Institute, and they have programs with local breeds and crossbreeds. And it was interesting to find out from them that they said that the crossbreeds are actually not the best for reducing climate change impacts, because when you compare the whole lifespan productivity and the emissions, then you finally see them to emit more per unit of output, and also it's not more economically viable. But this is what they have experienced here in India. In other countries, crossbreeds are better, and well, it depends on what kind of traits the local breeds have and the climatic situation. So there must be adaptability also in the situation. And then I'm talking also about animal health, because once you have a health problem, for example, if you have mastitis, the yield of milk is reduced. And so if we are comparing emissions per unit of output, then we are having a lower output. That means that we are indirectly increasing on the emissions. So we have to work very well on the health of our livestock in order to reduce emissions from them. Then there are other management techniques like reducing the age at first calving, or increasing on the calving interval, making it shorter, and well, playing on the replacement rate. Sometimes it's better to have it longer. Sometimes it's more productive to keep animals for fewer years so that they can give more calves, or that they can produce more milk, for example. And one very important aspect is that we need to keep fewer animals. This is usually not a good selling term when I go to some areas where they use animals as a source of prestige. But of course, we know that each animal has its basic metabolic rate. It produces emissions even if it doesn't work, if it doesn't produce meat or milk. So the more animals we keep, the more emissions we make. And the more we keep less productive animals, we just create emissions without producing meat or milk. So we should keep fewer animals, but those which are really productive, in order to reduce on emissions. I have timing here. Okay, thank you. So then the next thing is to act on the supply chain. Well, we don't only have to act directly on the animals. We have like materials for producing milk or for milk packaging and all that. So we have to reduce on waste generation in the supply chain. And we also need to recycle a lot of material in order not to lose much. Then next option is manure management. And in terms of manure management, what we advise is that we use the manure from the animals to produce fertilizer, which we apply on the soil, and we use it to produce our crops. And we use the crops either as cereals or as byproducts to feed the animals back. And then we have a cycle. And once we do that cycle, there is nutrient efficiency in the cycle. That means we increase the efficiency of converting nutrients within a cycle. We don't lose through emissions, and so we don't need to apply more fertilizer on the crops, which is also beneficial to the crops. So when we talk about manure management, we talk about collecting manure, treating the manure, and in treatment we look at biogas as an option. When we capture the methane which comes from manure and use it as a source of energy, we indirectly reduce black carbon emissions, because these farmers usually use wood to cook, and that produces black carbon. But now we are replacing it with biogas. They can cook, they have a renewable source of energy, so they are saving the forest also by doing that, and it's also less labor intensive. And when it comes to storage, we advise farmers to cover the manure because it preserves the nutrients in it, There are losses through volatilization if you expose the manure, and this indirectly reduces on the nutrient content of the manure. And when it comes to application, we have to incorporate the manure with the soil in order that we don't lose nutrients by volatilization, and also sometimes we have leaching. The nutrients are washed away, and that can also lead to water pollution, which is also not too good. Then when it comes to our diet, usually we advise people in the Western world to reduce meat consumption or consumption of animal products. But I will be very wicked, I would say, if I'm telling you now to reduce the consumption of animal products, because the level is already low, it's even lower than recommended. So, of course, we still need to consume animal products, and so I will not advise you to do that. You can also see in the chart there that the countries which are poorer, they are down here. They are poorer countries, they consume less animal proteins. The richer countries are up there, they consume more animal proteins. And well, we are growing, probably we will have to consume more livestock proteins because we also need them for our growth. And well, one thing I can recommend is to change from consuming ruminant proteins to non-ruminant proteins, because I had shown the chart which shows that ruminant proteins, they emit, the production of ruminant proteins lead to more emissions of greenhouse gases. So then I'll just flip through our experiences in Kenya. This is a chart that shows that there are a lot of models that predict, but the values, these are just predictions. So the model predicted this black line, and what scientists observed were these ones. So models don't give right results. What we are doing is we try to find out the right emission factors. We have a center called Mazingira Center in Kenya. We try to find the right emission factors, look at land degradation, and also run experimental trials on feeding strategies and emission reduction, and train farmers, technicians, and all those around with also socioeconomic benefits on environmental aspects. And that is our own contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We do feed management trials, production of silage to help farmers in the dry season when they don't have enough feed, and that also leads to reduction in emissions. Well, I'll just show you trial that we did with the silage. We compared a meal with silage and a meal, a standard meal, and what we saw is that the animals that took the silage supplement, they took in more feed and they gained weight. Meanwhile, the animals that were living under normal conditions in the dry season, they lost weight, and well, so it means that they produced emissions and still had a loss in weight. Meanwhile, those that had the supplements had an increase in weight, but they also produce emissions. But if we calculate the emissions per unit of output, which is weight gain, then we see that it's advantageous to give supplements to feed animals. And for manure management, we did the emission factor using our trials on the field, and we found out that the emission factor for manure was 0.2% to 0.8 compared to 2%, which the IPCC advocates for. That means that the emission factors are significantly overestimated when we use the IPCC measurements. But we have just started and we are doing more, and we are going to, well, disprove the IPCC after some time. We need a few years to get our research published in order to get acceptance. So then, just to summarize, I said livestock is producing 14.5% of total emissions, and if we keep doing things as we are doing right now, then the emissions will increase tremendously, and that's why we need to work hard in reducing the emissions. And well, we need to do improvement in efficiency, and this helps also in reducing emissions. And of course, we need capacity building, we need also research, because we need to get the right methods in place. We need to quantify our approaches well in order to get the right adaptation approaches. And that comes on with extension, research, and development, because the farmers or the end users have to be informed. And finally, ILRI is doing a lot of research on that. We just started this year. We are a new research institute, and we hope to develop the right factors for the developing world in order to get the right adaptation strategies which we can apply when it comes to environmental footprints in Africa and Asia. Thanks a lot.